I'm here to help women reset and rewild, to embrace and prioritize the pauses in order to reclaim their peace and power. I'm Dr. Michelle Peris, director of the Poppy Clinic and founder and CEO of the Wild Collective. As a disruptor, naturopathic doctor, wife, and mama, I've created a global movement and sacred space for women to rise together. Here, you'll break through limitations, romanticize your life, and unlock the magic of your divine feminine power. My life's work is rooted in community, lifting women into their most powerful, authentic selves, while empowering clinicians to elevate their practices with a transformational, community-driven model. I lead a thriving, passion-fueled business and naturopathic practice brimming with abundance, where I can guide women to invigorate their lives through sisterhood and elevate healthcare with a cutting-edge transformational approach. I've witnessed firsthand in my practice how this model sparks consistent health transformation, creates flourishing communities, and brings profitable success. You can have it all, a life filled with abundance, contagious joy, and untethered potential. So pull up a seat. It's time to pour into yourself and tap into your intuition and design a life that's wild, free, and uniquely yours. And I'm going to show you how. This is Wild Medicine. All right, welcome back to Wild Medicine. I am your host, Dr. Michelle Peris, and my fellow co-host, Dr. Tara Rawana, is resting today. So it's a solo episode with me. Yay! Although we miss her. We always miss her and wish her well. Okay, so there's been a lot coming up on my end from clinical practice, from Wild Collective, from just coming back from a girls' trip. There's a lot I've been wanting to share, and I thought this would be the perfect way to articulate what's been coming up for me. In our most advanced Wild Collective group, Wild Play, we have been studying the archetype of a wild woman, of, what it really means to be the divine feminine and to be in that level of authority and coherence. And that for me is like this beautiful, vision of balance, this expression. It's been so wonderful. We've studied men for years. And although that's been so helpful, it's been really, really helpful to understand maybe where we got confused, where we got this wrong, where maybe modern day messaging has resulted in dysfunctional partnerships and poor communication. That has really served us. And we got to a point where the women were like, can we study us now? I mean, obviously we start with the Wild Collective, where we're learning body literacy and how to optimize a woman's body. And then we really do in Forever Wild move to this beautiful realm of mindset and spiritual development and how to integrate all these pieces, how to become embodied from everything that we learn from the sensory information that we take in through understanding our physical body better. And then Wild Play is just where we start to practice this embodiment. And so we found ourselves back from where we just started, which is really studying the archetype of the wild woman and what it means to be divinely feminine. And it has been incredibly enjoyable, and lots of stuff has come up for me, and it's been so healing. And there's a lot of full circle moments. Really, 10 years ago around this time is when I was dreaming up the Poppy Clinic and the Wild Collective. And really, it was just, I was planting the seeds. And so I was in the depths of these books, genuinely confused as to what I was reading, because I didn't understand these concepts. And so it's really feels very full circle to be coming back to those things and have a level of embodied understanding 10 years later to be able to articulate and guide women on this beautiful journey of how to rewild themselves and what that actually means, and how to discern what that means for each of us, because that's going to look different. That's the point. And I went away with my besties over the weekend, the girls who I always speak about in my story in terms of finding belongingness in a group. I feel like sometimes when I talk about that, it's like downplaying or trivializing the relationships that I had before the age of 26. And I don't mean to ever. There have been pockets of people who are really, really beautiful and very helpful to me in terms of feeling connected and belonging. When I'm speaking about these girls in particular, it was like a homecoming. It was like a safe space to be fully expressed. especially in our weirdness, and find a place where that was celebrated, and that there wasn't really this room for gossip. And one of my girlfriends and I like talked and talked and talked for hours, and she was saying one of the things she appreciated about me. And sometimes it's just nice to hear what other people's experience with you is, because sometimes you overlook things. But she said, you were one person that didn't get caught up in the story of stuff. And I would say that remains even more strong today. When people want to have tough conversations, sometimes people get stuck in the story and not really with what the lesson ought to be. All's to say that I don't know what is going on, what is in the air, what's coming with this spring, but it feels like something big is blooming, and it's a culmination of everything that has been germinating for the last 10 years. It feels very full circle. Anyways, what do I want to talk to you about today? If you're still listening, and I promise you this is a good one, from all that information I'm taking in, the Wild Play Masterclasses that I have enjoyed so greatly, the breath work, the time with really, really good friendships, good friends, I want to bring a conversation to the table that I think is really, really important. And it speaks to why it is so important that we understand the wild woman archetype and why we rewild ourselves and come home to this level of coherence and peace. Because most of us were conditioned to be good. And there is a good girl tax that nobody really understands. And that's really what I want to speak to about today, is like, how do we get to this level of self-trust where we don't feel the need to comply or people please or keep the peace, and really move in the world with a high level of integrity and intentionality, but in a way that feels very integral to us. And then being able to have a level of discernment, because we trust ourselves so much, to see the conversation underneath the conversation. And what I mean by that is, somebody's words can be saying one thing, but you could be picking up sensory data that helps you see the incoherence of what is being said in front of you. And it allows for you to make a whole informed decision about how you want to move with this person. So I'm going to read you a quote a friend sent me today, someone I trust and look up to a lot. And she's one of my closest and most trustworthy people in talking about this, because she understands this at a really great depth. And that was really nice to reconnect over the weekend and remember that. Like, there are those people in your world, even though sometimes time passes, you don't talk all that often. There's some people that are on such an aligned path, and you're learning very similar lessons at the same time. You're like, wow, that's so cool to like share and deepen our understanding of the data that we're taking in. But here's the quote: "How people treat you is information, not an invitation to overanalyze. It is data, not a riddle. Their actions are simply mirrors reflecting their character, not your worth. Receive the message, adjust your boundaries, and keep moving. Not every behavior deserves your confusion." Okay, let me unpack this, because I think this is a really important one. And I think this is the work that I have been wanting to become masterful at over the last 10 years in the Wild Collective. And it's how I've wanted to guide and support women on similar paths. Even with the texts that we're reading right now, and the information that we're taking in, it's like I was saying, there's just like such synchronicities. It would be about 10 years ago that I was even making the decision to name the clinic the Poppy Clinic. And the reason I named the clinic the Poppy Clinic was because of the book we're now reading. And we just reviewed the chapter in which I attribute the name of the clinic to. I actually always wanted to name it. Well, always. Once the idea of the clinic was going to happen, I wanted to name it Poppy. And I was met with a lot of resistance. Not everybody loved it. I thought it was cute, and I liked that it was herbal, but I felt it had feminine personality. I don't know. It just spoke to me. And anyways, so I was sharing that with some family members, and they were like, "No, you don't like it." And I was like, "Well, I really do." And then I was like rifling through this book, and I landed on a page that my mother-in-law had underlined. And the page number was 111. I love that number. And the first word I saw on the page was Poppy, and that was it. Like, it was locked and loaded for me. I'm like, no, this is the name of the clinic. It's happening. No one can talk me out of this now. And I am like that. I've always made quick decisions. I actually have to watch my speed. That's also a liability, but I don't overthink in a lot of areas. And again, I have to watch that because sometimes I can be harsh or too cut off from the feelings of things. But I would say I like that about myself. And that was one moment where I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's cool if you don't like it. It's for me, it's feeling very congruent. And what comes up in this chapter around this concept of the poppy seed is that a woman in her wild, a woman who trusts herself so much has such a level of discernment that she can separate poppy seed from soil. So it's like this ability to not get distracted by things of this world, by the shiny objects, the dangling of the carrot, like all the things that are like, could be very, very distracting if you weren't intentional with your time, to really know what path you're on and to be able to take in data and make decisions according to the data that you're actually experiencing. And so on that, an extension of this, and how do we get to this level of having that poppy seed from soil discernment, is through being able to trust ourselves. And we're going to talk a bit today about why we don't and how to get there, and why I think the Wild Collective is one of the, hands down, I mean, I know I'm in it, but hands down, one of the best experiences, because it gives women the time, breadth, and depth to explore these concepts and work this through for themselves in their own lives. It's not something that you can intellectually or cerebrally understand. It needs to be practiced and embodied. It's not something, especially if the good girl conditioning runs deep for you. It's not something you're just going to like read and be like, well, that makes sense. I'm just going to totally operate my life like that. No, you've been doing things a certain way your whole life. And that's the tax. That's the good girl's hacks. Like, there is a cost to showing up in this way, but also to not make yourself bad and wrong or go into victim consciousness. It was a survival tactic for a very long time for you. So to also be compassionate and understanding why that good girl conditioning has shown up for you. It served a very, very important purpose. But now we're on the other side of that. We get to put into question if this is how we actually want to operate in our lives, right? So I'm going to give you my own depiction of this quote, and then I'm going to unpack this through some research that I've compiled and some storytelling through the things that we do in our community. So how people treat you is information, not an invitation to overanalyze. Here's what I want to say about that. I would say women are highly emotional beings, and that is an asset and a liability. But we really, really like to feel. We really like to chew on and explore and understand. And there's a depth to the type of thinking we like to do, what feeds us. The consequence or the liability with that is that we can also overanalyze situations and end up palliating or compensating as a result of this overanalysis. Sometimes, all the time, rather, as we get older, we want to have a higher level of discernment, wisdom, and intelligence around this. How people treat you is information. And not everything is meant to be overcomplicated. Like I've, as we all have had to go through situations and things that would cause incredible pain and discomfort in the past. I am able to move through a lot faster these days, but you do need to explore that every time it comes up, because you want to always further your depth. And now I am at a level where, no matter the depth of the relationship, no matter what the intentionality and high level of conscientious and love the words that are being provided to say something to me, I'm always taking in all types of sensory information. When they talk about the wild woman archetype, they're talking about this woman who has like 1,000 eyes. And what this means to me is like, you have this depth to take in a complex level of data and be able to make sense of that in order to understand what's really going on, the conversation under the conversation. So you can wrap up your message in a cute little bow with a lot of words and a lot of love and a lot of like prefaces. But when you're in your wild, when you understand and when you can take in sensory information, you can feel what's actually being said. You can feel someone's congruence or incongruence with what they're saying. And when you get to this level of trust, you can hear someone say the same thing, and you can hear them say it and have the discernment of when they're saying it in a congruent fashion or an incongruent fashion. So let's use an example. Let's like, this is so easy is thinking about relationships. And you're in this relationship, and let's say example A is a relationship where you don't feel that safe. You don't feel that equal or well partnered with this person. They cause a lot of distress. You're aware that it's like not totally aligned. And there's a lot of frenetic or anxious energy around that because it's lacking safety. And this person can say to you, no, I love you. And you're like, I hear your words, but like all this other data would demonstrate that you don't love me. But then the good girl conditioning tells us to override those sensations because we want to make the other person comfortable, or we really want to believe their words. And instead of letting them hold the discomfort, we hold it for them on their behalf. And that's good girl tax. Then there's the other, where someone is, their actions, words, tonality, body language, everything aligns. There's coherence, there's congruence. My level of discernment now is I really am watching people. I'm watching people for 1,000 eyes. And any kind of misstep doesn't mean I chastise them or write them off. It means like, okay, well, I'm going to put that in the bank. Sometimes things are just accidental, but if there's an accumulation of that, then I start to really think about whether or not that person is well suited in my life, right? I was saying this to a friend, like at 45, almost 45, I should say. I'm not 45 yet, but almost there in a couple of weeks, but almost 45. You start to really see the world a little bit differently. And you start to really think like, does this person belong in my life or in my inner circle? Like time is precious. If you have lived and you have a pulse, you've probably struggled with some form of loss and you realize how precious life is. And then you really start to have a level of intentionality of like, does this person deserve to stay in my life? Right. So with these two examples, there's the incongruent and there's the congruence, where their actions, their words, the way their body language, their tone, all of it lines up, right? So this is like how people treat you as information, not an invitation to overanalyze. That's exactly it. I don't overanalyze this anymore. I take in that sensory data and I make decisions on what's presenting. Whereas for so many years, and I would say Wild Collective is directly responsible for most of my growth around this. For most of my years, I overrid my internal data that was coming up for me about being uncomfortable or upset about somebody's incongruence. And I used to justify, and we'll talk about why so many of us do this, but for a very long time, I would take someone at their words because I really wanted it to be true. Maybe I wasn't feeling that good about myself, so I was hoping I could latch on to what someone else was saying about the situation at hand or whatever. And, really in the last few years and really accelerated in the last 6 months, there is a level of trust in me where I am taking in data and I am behaving and making decisions differently because the level of self-trust and integrity that I hope to bestow to others as well is so strong that I can't override my system anymore. Now they talk about the veil of menopause like falling. I'm stepping into 45. I'm definitely in perimenopause. There are definite signs and probably my reduced level of willingness to tolerate things that don't align. That is one of the signs that I'm experiencing is like I'm not willing to override some sensory data these days. Okay, so the next line is, it is data, not a riddle. I think I've explained this. It's not a riddle. They're not trying to be poetic and cute. They're telling you exactly who they are and how they move. You don't need to overanalyze. You do need to know your liabilities coming into any interaction. I was saying to my friends, like, I have to watch myself. I have the propensity to be cold and cut off a lot quicker than I am to like override and justify. I would say I swing to the other side. So I have to remember to bring a lot of compassion and understanding and forgiveness to the work that I do, to the relationships that I hold, because I know how easy I can cut people off. It's not easy, but I have that part in me way more with men than with women. But in partnerships growing up, I was pretty ruthless and cutthroat and emotionless, really. And that has more to do with the fact that I probably stayed in relationships far too long. And then by the time I actually was brave enough to break up with someone, I'd been over it for months. So I was cold. It had ended so long ago for me. That's not kind and that's not right. I'm not justifying my behavior at all. I'm just sharing that I have a good understanding as to why I am how I am. And I was talking to a family member and I realized that maybe it is a unique gift I have, but when I go through things, when life happens, I'm always looking for the lesson. I'm always seeking the understanding or the wisdom, like extrapolating the wisdom. I don't just think things happen at face value. Things don't happen just to happen. It's a lesson. So I am annoyingly complicated. Like I overthink everything, but in a beautiful way, not overthink like, sorry. I intentionally think and try to extrapolate wisdom from everything that I experience. So I have a good level of understanding, but I think that's why I'm able to like see these parallels for myself because I've thought about it. Like, why did I behave that way? Why was I so ruthless? Why was I so cutthroat? Right? Because I don't want that to be the case with my kids and my now husband, my life partner. I wouldn't ever want to be thought of as that way, right? Okay, next line. Their actions are simply mirrors reflecting their character, not your worth. We love, especially as good girls and stuck in our good girl conditioning, we love to weave and tether. And we think how someone treats us has to do with us. And we'll talk about how this happened. But to keep the peace in order to make things work, we had to shapeshift. And as a result of that shapeshifting, we think when people say something or they act in a way, it somehow means that we did something. And what needs to really, really be known and remembered is that their actions are mirrors reflecting who they are, what their character is, not your worth. They are untethered. They are two totally different things. We're not in most cases that cryptic and organized to be able to behave in a way that would make you feel less worthy. We are simply reflecting who we actually are, and you're taking in that information and making it about you. And this is an important distinction, and I was grateful to have this distinction for myself and know this distinction for myself and be able to make different decisions as a result of that being true. Because now I don't overcomplicate things. When someone tells me something, I know it's a reflection of where they are, where they're stuck, what's coming up for them, not about me. You know, I guess there are certain cases where if they are talking about you, you've got to take in that information differently. Otherwise, I really understand that it's their world and they're enacting out the way they understand the world. It has nothing to do with me. Receive the message, adjust your boundaries, and keep moving. We don't need to sit in the story. And I would say I am unique here, but most women, I would say most women in good girl conditioning tend to overanalyze and overthink and overcomplicate and really get stuck. What I like about this quote is like receive the message, the whole message, not just the words, looking at the actions, the data, all that data, and receive it fully with the thousand eyes, like, okay, this is what is happening. Adjust your boundaries. Am I okay with this or not okay with this? And keep moving. Do not stay stuck. The biggest time waster and energy sucker is staying stuck in the confusion. It doesn't need to be confusing. The invitation is to not overcomplicate this. Take in the sensory information, understand if you're okay or not okay with it, and move accordingly. Not every behavior deserves your confusion. No. Some things are crystal clear. Some things are crystal clear when you accept the information as it is presenting. Most of our confusion comes from us wanting to justify, or we were hoping for a different outcome. So we're like, really trying to weave a different story, right? And I think this is so important. This has been coming up time and time again through my own female friendship conversations, from Wild Play, from the books that I'm reading. I think it's really important that we have this understanding, because this is where a lot of us get stuck. And this is why a lot of us stay stuck and in relationships and full of resentment. There is a cost. It's not cheap to not be moving appropriately on the sensory data that you're taking in. There's an expensive cost with this. So maybe you have a situation where you're bothered by something, and it'd be very helpful if you could think of something where someone cancels on you, someone overtalks you, or someone only reaches out when they need you. You probably already know what you feel about it, and you've probably known for a while. The question is, what have you done with that information? So for most women that I have the opportunity to work with, we tend to minimize how we actually feel about it or justify, right? Like it's not that bad, or they're going through a lot. Or they probably didn't mean it this way. And we shape shift because we don't want to make the other person uncomfortable. Maybe you've made it about you. I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm asking too much, but you realize that you're feeling a lot more resentful. And you might not be saying that because voicing it seems incredibly difficult and scary. And that I would say one thing I didn't realize we would be so equipped at, because it's what women needed, was helping women develop communication skills to be able to articulate this in a healthy manner so that they could be heard and received the way they desire to and achieve a different outcome for themselves. Most of us were not taught how to problem solve and how to communicate our feelings in a coherent way where we could be heard, right? Because for most of us, we were never allowed to fully process or alchemize our emotions. We tend to tether emotions with our lived experience and how we articulate it, and it comes out so much messier than we intend, and then we aren't heard because, again, like I started with, there's always a conversation under the conversation, and so they're taking in that sensory data too. And so if what you're sharing isn't congruent, you can't be heard either. That's how this works. So when we learn these skills, we start to understand how vitally important it is that there is congruence, that when you actually start to articulate yourself, that the words that you say, how you say it, and how your body articulates coherence and congruence is vitally important in being heard. It's also why you're having a strong reaction to someone else who's in incongruence, right? Who's saying all the right things, but the behavior doesn't match. What you're experiencing is not overthinking. It is over trusting other people at the expense of trusting yourself. Trust is a big one. Trust is something that we talk a lot about in Shed and Wild Collective and all the work that I do, because at our core, I think that is one of the most important determining factors for long-term transformation, no matter what you're looking to achieve. Health, career, relational, your propensity to trust yourself, and then as a consequent, trust others, is vital to the equation. So when we are outsourcing our trust, when we overtrust others and not ourselves, it says everything about how little we trust the data. And that's just information. You don't need to overthink that one either. It's just, oh, isn't that interesting? I guess I'm struggling to trust myself with the data that I'm experiencing. And I'm trying to justify or shapeshift and listen to the words because I want the words to be true, even though I am picking up on other data and there's something that feels off here. And instead of sitting with the offness and rifling through what's coming up for you, we tend to stuff it down, get resentful, and move in a different direction to keep the relationship alive, even though now it's become dysfunctional because it's incongruent for you. The data comes in clearly. The problem isn't the data. You actually know. That's the crazy thing. The more I work with, gosh, I'm at thousands of women now, gratefully and respectfully. I've worked with thousands of women. Women know data is not the problem. The problem is that you were trained from childhood to distrust the very instincts that are trying to protect you. And so that level of discernment is the poppy seed from soil, right? It's not over complicating things. It's choosing to actually see this a little different. Okay, so the fawn response. This is newer data. When we go into that fight or flight response, most of us know that sympathetic nervous system response of fight, flight, and freeze. But there's a fourth one called fawn. And that one lives quietly in most women. And it describes it as becoming hypervigilant. Okay, so therapist Pete Walker is who popularized the term. And it describes it as becoming hypervigilant to the needs of others in order to feel safe. Remember, at our core, this is why this is so important. This is why work in the Wild Collective is so important. Our most primal need is to belong. It meant survival back in the day. So you can see how, even though you might be taking in information that makes you feel very uncomfortable, if vocalizing your discomfort with that meant that you could be exiled from the tribe, from the community, you often swallow it because belongingness feels more like a primal need to survive than to not be exiled by yourself, right? This episode is brought to you by the Wild Collective. If you are ready for something innovative, something truly transformational, you are wanting to build a beautiful life and thriving health and vibrant energy, and you're not sure how to build that in, you might want to consider something as incredible as the Wild Collective. The Wild Collective is our women's health initiative. It is a closed community of like-minded individuals. It is where sisterhood meets self-care. There's 10 modules of fundamental women's health, all the evidence-based information that you need, the testing, the handouts, the assessment, how to advocate for yourself in the wellness space. Also, what natural and integrative approaches you can consider for any age and stage in life. And being that it is part of a community, you also get this beautiful experience of meaningful connection, conversations that matter, and truly up-leveling your life. So if you are ready to take on something totally transformative and fun, then please go check us out at the Wild Collective. So that's the-wild-collective.com. Get on the wait list, and we will see you in one of our wild circles very soon. So this hypervigilance is the thing that is running the show. There's like this side of us that becomes hypervigilant. And in the good girl conditioning, and we talk about this a lot in Wild, is this hypervigilant part of ourself is so flexed, it's so sophisticated that it's policing you in live time. It makes us incredible chameleons, if you will, where you can actually think a thought and want to say the thought. But the time between thinking and saying, this hypervigilance part of you is filtering that information to be palatable to the other person. Like, how crazy smart and intelligent is that woman to be able to do that in live time? Now, it's energy data being exercised in the wrong direction, right? And this is why the first step is always awareness, because when you understand this is what's actually going on, you're like, wow, how incredibly smart and intelligent am I that I am doing that in live time? Like, I know something to be true, and I might say it in a certain way to one audience member differently than to another, because I know how to shapeshift and say that to be heard, to find connection, to be included, to belong, to help them feel safe, right? And when I say this in circles, I see women's heads shaking wildly. They know what I'm talking about, but it's quite this advanced skill. Most of it is unconscious, and most of it was created from a very young age, where our needs for survival were in the hands of our caregivers. So we shapeshifted, and now it's a very, very flexed part of our personality. We think it's who we are, but it's not. It's just a behavior we've been enacting for a very, very long time. But the hypervigilance is not to your own needs, it's to theirs, right? So this is how this shape-shifting happens. When we were little, we learned quickly what earns us love and safety. If being agreeable kept the peace, if being helpful earned us praise, if keeping our discomfort to ourselves is what kept us love, then our nervous system files all that away. Being good equals belonging, and being difficult equals danger. That's why so many of us who are told we are too loud, too much, we started to interpret that as dangerous. So we suppressed, we softened, we put those parts of ourselves away, right? And we became moderate and polite and agreeable, right? What this does in the long run is we become extraordinarily skilled at reading other people. This is what I was talking about, the whole chameleon shape-shifting geniuses that we are, scanning the room, monitoring moods, adjusting ourselves before anyone even asks us to. The good girl is so good at conditioning herself, policing herself. She doesn't even need feedback from other people. She's got it handled. Imagine if we could take these amazing gifts and assets that we have and redirect them to things that actually served and helped us expand, thrived, and benefited others. right? Right now, we're just like using it to police, which is crazy exhausting. We become experts at emotional surveillance of everyone around us while simultaneously becoming strangers in our own emotional signals, right? So you're choosing. Do you want to be exiled from others or exiled from yourself? This is truly like the conundrum of rewilding, right? And when we use these strong words like exiled, I think we also hear like there's a harshness or a finality. This doesn't have to be like burn it all down aggressive. There can be like a beautiful, creative, conscientious way that we can start to shift from one to another. It doesn't have to be like catastrophic. I think that's the thing that like terrifies women about this work is like they think they're going to blow up their life, and some do, but that's an intentional decision. I would say I've learned to become incredibly conscientious, kind, and loving while doing this work and setting healthy boundaries and choosing who I want to align with. So it doesn't have to be like destructive. There can be a very gentle way of doing this. And gentle's not the right word, but like a softer, more feminine way, more creative path forward. Those who fawn under the belief that they are responsible for regulating the emotions of those around them, this constant state of alertness causes disconnection from their own experience. So they're very attuned to other people's experiences and they totally abandon themselves. So they don't actually know their emotions, needs, or desires, and they prioritize the monitoring of others' emotional states instead. You can see how this becomes very confusing to this person, right? That it feels like a level of self-betrayal that's very, very hard to reconcile unless you're very intentional about doing it, because it's happening now at such a sophisticated level, you're probably largely unaware you're even doing it. It's not an overthinking thing. It's that your nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do to protect you from perceived danger of being seen as too much, right? If that meant your survival as a young girl, that's how it shows up now. There's so many people, so many like wonderful women in Wild Collective who share stories, and my stories are very similar. Like I talk about that photo shoot that I did last June, and the family member said something to me and I immediately shut down. I immediately didn't want to share any of my photos. Like I was so uncomfortable. It's amazing the power of someone's words can take you, because that was a really, really empowering experience for me. I'm sure I've podcasted about it because I feel like I have a memory of it, but it took what felt like a really, really cool moment for me. And immediately I was filled with guilt and shame and wanting to hide. So this isn't a personal failing. This is a pattern, and it's deeply conditioned, widely shared, and often invisible. That's the thing I think has been so fascinating to me in this work, right? When I work with women, is most of us don't even realize that this self-policing, good girl governing, it's happening without us even knowing it. It is such a strong part of who we are, and it's been there for so long that we are largely unaware that this is happening. Okay. So good girl conditioning and the distrust of your own data. How the heck did this happen? What were we taught as good girls? That's where this conditioning and overthinking lives. When girls accommodate others, when they say yes, when they avoid conflict. I had a friend say it to me this weekend. She's like, I don't like conflict. I don't either. Prioritize others' needs. They are told, you're such a good girl. Thank you for being so easy. I knew I could count on you. Over time, this conditions a deep association between compliance and self-worth. That's a tough one for a lot of us. And being agreeable and helpful becomes not just the behavior, but part of one's identity. We think it's who we are, right? We think our worth is in being compliant. You're such a good girl. Thanks for making this so easy, right? So that's how this gets chiseled. And then we start to govern ourselves through experiences. And then this is how I call it the lukewarm living. This is how women get to their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and say, like, I thought it was all supposed to be more than this, more colorful, more beautiful, more poetic, more fun, happier. But everything feels like so lukewarm. It's because this governing has been going on for decades. And so you don't even actually know who you are, and you don't even know if what you want, and you don't even know if what you've built is even a reflection of you or what would make you happy. That's the part I want to wake women up from and shake them up. Be like, this is why we need the wild. This is why we need to understand the wild woman archetype. And this is why we do this work, so that we can be so incredibly intentional. What's important to understand that this is not your identity. When someone treats you in a way that doesn't sit right, setting a boundary isn't just uncomfortable. It feels like a threat to who you are. Because your nervous system has been wired to believe that your worth is in your agreeableness. That if you say something, if you set a limit, if you stop explaining away the pattern, you become the difficult one and demanding one, and maybe even the bitch, right? So here's my clinical take on that. The fear of being seen as a bitch is a survival strategy that is actively working against your well-being. I say that with an incredible level of compassion because I've lived this way myself and probably still do in some respects, right? It's really important to know where it comes from, and we have to look at it clearly because it's the thing that keeps you overanalyzing the data your body already processed correctly, right? So when we talk about embodiment, we talk about going deeper and taking in somatic data from the body, which is why Wild Collective is so vitally important, is that you need to understand how to interpret this data. But we take our understanding deeper than intellectual, right? So the intellect will take someone's words at face value and say, and this is what causes the overanalyzing. They say that they are sorry. They say that they will do better. They say, and so we take those words and we're like, okay, they said it. But when this is like an embodied experience, you're taking in different data and you're like, but there seems to be incongruence in their words. Their actions are not matching up with what they're saying. I have past experiences that impact or contradict this statement, and we start to see that differently, right? So I think that's really important to start to like put that out there, is like, this is why we have to move beyond the intellect. This is why we can't take things at face value. Or if you have been, this is probably why you feel so fundamentally confused, empty, lukewarm, sad, maybe even depressed, because things aren't matching up. And the beautiful thing that I've learned from being in the Wild Collective for so long is that your body did process that information correctly. That's what's creating the discomfort. The discomfort is the signal of an imbalance, not a betrayal, not something to overanalyze. It is the data that's like, this doesn't match. What are you going to do with the mismatch, right? That tightness in your chest before saying yes for something you don't want to do. That's your body trying to tell you something. That clenching in your jaw when someone crosses a boundary, that's your nervous system responding. But the good girl in us says, don't make it a big deal. Be nice, smile. You were probably praised for that. You're so agreeable. The body's already reading the data. The conditioning just taught us not to trust the read, right? So the conditioning, the good girl conditioning, is what's getting in the way of us trusting the data. As we get older, if it's the drop of the hormonal veil, if it's lived experience, if it's whatever it is, but it starts to become really uncomfortable for most of us. And we wonder why we're so exhausted. And I wonder how much our exhaustion comes from just tolerating so many things. How much of your energy is being leaked by shape-shifting to make others comfortable while you exile what feels true to you, right? What overthinking is actually doing. Okay, so let's be very specific about when you get the data and then you decide to overanalyze the act. When you receive the information, someone cancels on you repeatedly or speaks to you dismissively or takes and doesn't give back. And that's when the spiral starts and you start saying things like justifying. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe if I give it more time, maybe if I'd said something differently, maybe it was something I did. Maybe, right? Here's what that spiral is doing. So instead of taking that data, you're justifying this spiral is keeping you in the relationship with someone's behavior in a way that centers them and completely removes you from the equation, right? How do I change to make them more comfortable, to change the behavior that I feel sad about them being non-compliant to, right? If they always cancel, right? Maybe if I do it this way, maybe then they won't cancel, right? Instead of taking that data of like, no, this person doesn't keep their word. And I now have to decide, is keeping your word important to me or not important to me, right? That's a whole different conversation than shape-shifting to try and make them not cancel on you. The overanalysis is not is not actually about figuring out the situation. It's about staying safe. I've said this before and I'll say it again. So much of what we know, think, and do comes down to safety. Okay. Safety first. This is why breath work. This is why all these mindset pieces that I'm so vigilant on these days. It's because we really need to understand the importance of feeling safe. Had I felt safe all along, I probably wouldn't have been so destructive to my partnerships growing up, right? But I didn't feel safe, which is why I acted in really reckless ways. Right? Because as long as you're analyzing, you don't have to act. Taking action scares a lot of us. Acting, setting the limit, adjusting your level of success, having the honest conversation feels like the more dangerous move. Right? There's a lot of safety in overanalysis because it keeps you in inaction. You're essentially running a background program all the time, assessing safety and adjusting your behavior to minimize conflict. In the book Untethered Soul, beautiful book. You have to read it a lot to get it, I think, or maybe I just am not as smart as some of you, but it talks about the psyche and how we've given the psyche the impossible task, and the psyche's distress is like the body's physical pain. Okay. But we've created this impossible task for the psyche to make needing everything about our world to be safe in order to do something. Right. So make sure that someone responds exactly how we want them to, that the world happens exactly as we think it should. And we say exactly what needs to be said and we move and until that happens, we won't feel safe. Well, you can understand why your psyche is now running, trying to make this happen. One, that's incredibly exhausting, but two, impossible. We can't control the circumstance. So unless we start to really challenge this and see it for what it is, it keeps us stuck, right? And this aligns with that exactly, right? Is that we need to understand what's actually happening here in order to sit with if we're okay with it or not okay with it. The mental energy this requires leaves little room for creativity, rest, or genuine connection. It's like your psyche is so overburdened. And why so many women wake up in the night with racing thoughts is because that your brain is trying to and the psyche are trying to sort through this information around the clock to make sure everything is about safety for you. And that's impossible. So now you can't even rest efficiently, right? So you have to understand the cost. It's really important. This over-analysis is incredibly exhausting, and not because you're weak, because it takes an enormous amount of energy and cognitive energy and emotional energy to keep talking yourself out of what you already know. Come on. We don't need to overcomplicate this. This is why, I keep talking about certain things that happened to me in the last year where somebody's words were one way and I really want to believe them, right? They're loving words, but the sensory data, the emotional data, the nervous system data that I took in was of incredible unsafety, feeling really unsafe. That wasn't a good sentence, but you know what I mean. And I'm at the point in my life now where that's becoming more important. I don't want to overanalyze. Just because someone's words are nice and we package it up in a bow doesn't change the fact that my body had a certain response to something. And I'm at the point in my life for the first time ever, and I'm really proud of myself. This is a decade in the making and a lifetime in the making where I'm sitting in that and saying, no, that doesn't work for me. Not because that person is bad, not because I'm mean, but because I trust the data. And I have to go on the data now, not the packaged bow, the perfected way of saying something, right? The part that makes something feel fierce every time I say it is the over-analysis doesn't protect you. It just delays the cost. That's the thing. We think that we're choosing the easier path and that there isn't a consequence, but you're just delaying the consequence. You're delaying the cost. You're swallowing the good girl tax again and again and again because the data was right the first time. And every moment you spend explaining someone's behavior is more time away from not acting in alignment with your own well-being. And there are parts that are sad. I am in grief right now. There is loss when we live like this, but will you be exiled from others or exiled from yourself? And there was a decision at some point for me where I no longer wanted to be exiled from what felt congruent to me. And there is consequence with that. That it just is. It's how people, probably heartbreakingly sever from their family because it's no longer safe, right? Being estranged from your family is not easy, but it is a decision based on the data that they're taking in order to be congruent in their life. Some decisions are hard. Why we want to stay in the overanalysis is because we don't want to make the decision, but it doesn't change that the consequence is there. Right? Their actions are mirrors of their character, not your worth. So when someone treats you poorly, there is a very human instinct to make it mean something about you. We all do it. We've been doing it for a really long time. If I were different, if I were more, if I were less, if I were easier, then it would be different. That's the conditioning that's getting kicked up. Resentment is often a boundary you didn't set. Hello. That's the consequence. Right? The cost is the resentment. And so when we talk about seeing bitter women older, that's the accumulated resentment, often unprocessed, right? So they become incredibly bitter towards the world, and men and women. I'm not calling out women. I'm just saying, people who've never set a boundary and let all that resentment reside within them. Are you feeling burnt out and exhausted? See you in someone who has recovered from a few burnouts herself. And through sitting in circles with women over the last 8 years, I have some perspectives as to what personality traits and habits and thinking traps perpetuate and put us at higher risk of developing and ending up in burnout. So if you want to find out your burnout archetype quiz, are you a CEO? Are you a saboteur, a martyr, a rescuer, a zombie? Then head over to the show notes, click the free quiz, and find out what might be getting in your way. Also, learn strategies and things to consider to help you reclaim your energy and recover from burnout so that you can be blissed out in the world and doing things that make you happy. Enjoy. We need to understand that these signals is a value or a need being crossed. There was some betrayal. And instead of articulating it, we swallowed it. We pushed it down. And then all of that comes brewing as a resentment. And this is why we can see women burn it all down in a week, because it comes to a point where they're like, I can't hold on any of this anymore. So I'm just getting rid of all of it. And it looks erratic and dramatic and really bold, but it's just years in the making. Years in the making. The thing, and the truth, their behavior is information about them. It has nothing to do with you. It's about their capacity, their patterns, their character. It's not a verdict of your worthiness of good treatment. You're not too sensitive. You're not asking too much. You're not misreading the situation. Just stop from thinking that. You're receiving data, and the only question that matters is, what are you going to do with it, right? What are you going to do with this information? I've talked about this a lot. Right? There was certain situations in the last year where that was what I asked about. I asked myself, in this situation where I'm obviously feeling a certain type of way, even though someone's words are telling me something different, what am I going to do about it? And I think the permission field that I'm talking about, because I think people think they have to be super dramatic and harsh, is sometimes you just hit pause and say, I need to take a beat. I need to think about this. I need to process this. I actually don't know how I want to proceed from taking in this data. I'm just very aware that this data has occurred in my body, and it's not feeling good to me. And where I'm really proud of myself is now not fully, but mostly, I let myself get there. You don't need to rush these decisions. Very few things are urgent. And of course, I deal with urgent things urgently. But if I need to process something and rifle through how I really feel about something, I give myself full permission now to be like, no, make sure you're quite integral how you move. Because being mad at someone or being mad at a situation is a rather immature first step. Why are you mad? What is coming up for you? What is that data? What do you need? How do you need those needs? How do you articulate those needs? How do you move forward? Right? So there's this time, space, and breath that I now permit myself to actually explore that, because as a woman who has been exiled from herself for 44 years and maybe less, because I'm starting to get better at this, It's going to take time to figure that out. When I ask women in wild circles what they desire, they genuinely look at me like perplexed. Like, I don't know. Why don't we know? We've been exiled from ourselves, from our feeling, from the data for so long. We actually genuinely do not know. We do not know. 3 things we do instead of adjusting our boundaries. So how does this show up instead of actually setting the boundary? One is the explanation factory. We generate explanation after explanation for someone's behavior. We justify. They're going through something hard. They didn't mean it like that. That's just how they are. And these things might be true, but none of them change the impact on you. So you're undermining that you're having some kind of reaction to the data that you're taking in. You can understand someone completely and still need to adjust your boundary, right? The worth audit. Instead of looking at the behavior as information about them, we turn it inward. Am I too much? Did I do something wrong? Is this what I deserve? This is conditioning in action. Their behavior triggered your deepest wound. Okay. The one that says love must be earned and can be lost if you take up the wrong amount of space. And 3, the relationship bargaining. We make deals with ourselves. If they do X, then I'll say something. If something happens one more time, then I'll act. Problem is that the goalposts keep moving because the real barrier isn't the number of incidents. It's the fear of what happens when we respond to the data because it terrifies us, right? If it meant that we were exiled from belongingness as a kid, we didn't survive. So it does feel like some level of death occurring. What adjust your boundary actually means in practice. This is the important thing that we need to start to put together for ourselves is like, these are just things I'm sharing. You will figure out how you want this to look for yourself, but important to consider. So what does this mean in practice for you? When we hear people say set a boundary, and I write about this all the time because this terrifies so many women I work with. We've never done it successfully. And we read memes and we feel like we should have it together. Like it should be super easy for us to just say no. End of sentence, right? Like I can't even imagine a woman just saying like no is a complete sentence. Like it wouldn't happen. It's not a thing. Maybe it is, but whatever. Not likely. Okay. And I'm talking about people who have never set a boundary before. It's just like, it's impossible. When women hear set a boundary, they often picture a dramatic confrontation that ends a relationship or makes everyone uncomfortable. So they don't do it because it feels too big. This is the thing I was talking about. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be bitchy. Perhaps there's a reframe. Adjusting your boundary doesn't always mean having a conversation. Sometimes it does. But first, the first act of trusting is trusting the data. It's internal. It's something that's happening inside, and it's validating that is your experience. Whether it's right or wrong is not the point. The point is that you're validating that it is coming up for you and being very aware without apology what you are and are not available for, right? Receive the message without the spiral. That's step 1. Something happens. You feel it in your body before you think about it, right? That chest tightness, that flatness, that heaviness you feel in your body, that's the data. Instead of immediately moving to explanation, try sitting with the message for a moment. What did that actually communicate to me about this relationship, right? What's actually going on here? First thing is awareness, always. 2, distinguish their character from your worth. These are 2 separate entities. This is going to be active work where you have to challenge your thinking because you've been thinking the same way for a really long time. It requires you to consciously separate these 2 because your conditioning has spent years fusing them. Their behavior is a reflection of their patterns, their capacity, their choice, not who you are, not the verdict on who you are. And step 3, ask what a boundary would look like at the minimum viable level. Not the hard conversation, not the ending of a relationship, the smallest real adjustment. I think this is super important for women to hold because I've seen this in lifetime. I know women are not going to overnight set the healthy boundary. Like I say all the time, like they haven't had a lobotomy. They are them. They've been this way. That good girl conditioning is flexed. You're not going to be able to set a badass boundary day 1. So what is the minimum viable level here? What can you do that helps make micro adjustments to the relationship that keeps you feeling safer? Maybe that looks like not volunteering as much. Not always saying yes when you mean no, saying the things, I'll get back to you, before just automatically saying yes when something's asked of you. Maybe it looks like not returning a call as quickly or not responding to texts as quickly. Maybe it looks like naming what you've noticed briefly and clearly next time that it happens. Maybe it starts with just a breath, like, how do I actually feel, right? And then for those who are further along and are ready for like the conversation, I want to offer this. You don't have to justify your boundary to make it valid. You don't need another person to agree with you or your read of the situation. Their agreement is not a prerequisite for your limit, right? That's the thing, is that when we are dealing with relationships, everyone's going to see it differently. Just because they see it differently doesn't make it not valid for you. Those are distinctly different and they both get to be there. They both can be true. You saw the data, you received the message, and you are adjusting accordingly. That is not being difficult. That's just being more honest with what's coming up for you. Okay. I was talking to someone over the weekend. This is what made this so relevant. And she was talking about how we get perceived, because we are stronger women who now are working towards setting healthier boundaries for ourselves. And we're often communicating with those who have never set a boundary for themselves. So it's even more polarizing an experience, but that it appears bitchy. That is the perception. And it can be really hard, especially when you are already a bigger personality. It's very easy to collapse those two ideas, right? The fear that comes up is an outcome of the conditioning that has spent decades telling you that your value is in your agreeableness. That's what's coming up. And the moment that you become inconvenient, you feel like you're going to become unlovable. People pleasing is not born out of nowhere. It starts for a reason. And the biggest difference is that fawning comes from fear. It's not about kindness and compassion. It's about understanding that this isn't coming from a generous place or it being in service. It's coming from fear, right? And it's about keeping yourself safe. The fear of being a bitch is a fear of losing safety. Your nervous system 100% of the time will choose familiar discomfort of the unaddressed boundary over the unfamiliar discomfort of the honest response, unless we work on that, right? We're always going to default to what we know because it's what kept us safe for so long. Okay, so here's what I've watched. I've witnessed in women who genuinely love and respect them do not leave when she speaks honestly, right? They hear them. And that's data in itself, right? If they go, you have your answer, right? They were just, what is it? Those who get mad at setting a boundary were the only ones who were benefiting from you not having them, right? So if someone loves you for you, they're not going to get upset about this. They're going to be really grateful. Maybe it's going to take time for them to process it, but they're going to be really grateful that you were able to be so honest. Honesty creates intimacy and it creates a deepened relationship. The relationships that were only sustained by being agreeable reveal themselves to be what they always were, one-sided arrangements that required her to be smaller, right? The most important thing is that the cost of constantly accommodating behavior that doesn't feel right is not zero. You're paying the cost in resentment. You are stuffing that down somewhere. And whoa, the body keeps score. The body will keep the score. This is not innocent. It gets processed somewhere in depletion, in chronic low-grade grief, in exhaustion, in sadness. Being honest about what you're receiving is not bitchy. It's just honest. And honest is what genuinely good relationships can handle. Right? It'll feel real to those people. So how does the nervous system play a role here? And why does it feel like danger? I think this is the most important part. When you receive information that requires a response, when someone's behavior sends a clear signal and you feel a wave of anxiety or that compulsion to explain away, it's your nervous system doing its job, right? It's not a weakness. It's what your body has been wired to do. When you set boundaries, your nervous system may interpret that as danger because it's unfamiliar. It feels awkward. Boundaries can feel mean even when they're healthy, right? Because if you've never set one before, it's going to feel, especially if you've been praised for being a good girl, so agreeable, right? Your nervous system was trained in a context where asserting a need or a limit didn't produce real consequences, disapproval, conflict, and emotional withdrawal. It learned that lesson and stored it in your body. And now it fires alarms in situations that are actually safe. Setting a boundary is safe. But it's working with old information, old data of how you were, how you responded to your caregivers. It's a skill and it's a nervous system renegotiation, right? It's teaching you your body slowly and with practice, that an honest response is survivable. You do not die. This is why breath work and titration towards tough emotions are actually very helpful, because once you've helped normalize those more sympathetic responses, increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, increased tingling in your body or sweating, it's like your body's like, oh, I've done this before. It's not scary. I am safe, right? So we start to calibrate to a new level of safety. And then the discomfort of the response becomes shorter and smaller, right? Than the discomfort of ongoing accommodation. And that's how we start to create a better balance. And that's really the work. Truly, that is really the work. That's why breath work has become something that I want to provide for all of my communities, because I see the value in that. So here's what I would like to invite for you this week. Think of one situation where you've been overanalyzing behavior. And if you're being honest, you've already received the message from. Not the hardest one, but the one where you can start to breathe, right? So don't go with your hardest situation. Go with something that seems to be like repetitive data that is uncomfortable for you. And in your journal, I want you to write, the data told me this blank, and I'm going to receive that message and adjust by this blank, right? So what is it that the data keeps coming in for you? And what adjustment would you like to make? You don't have to send a text or set the boundary. It's just starting to sit with the truth and the trust of the data that's coming up for you. I think that's why I've talked about certain situations on repeat, because I'm really impressed with myself that I had the discernment between very loving words and the data that my nervous system took in from the exact same exchange. That I was willing to, with the 1,000 eyes of a woman in her divine feminine, to take in all data and make a decision based on all data, not just what was packaged up in a pretty little bow, right? Because trust for a woman who is trained not to trust herself begins with the small act of saying what I know, right? Just like in the moment, like what feels true to me right now. Understanding that you're not too sensitive, you're not asking too much, you're not misreading the room. You're someone who learned to read other people beautifully and is now finally learning how to read and trust herself. And truly, this is all birthed out of the work that we do out of the Wild Collective. I'm where I am today because of this work, because I am a woman in practice too. And this is where we do this very, very important work. So if some part of this conversation landed for you, if some part of you took in this data and was like, oof, this feels like truth, and I wish I had access to this. I wish I could do this. I wish I could trust myself at that level. Then I would love for you to come find us. I would love for you to click the Wild Collective link in our show notes and sign up for the waitlist. We're going to be offering lots of Wild Collective opportunities very soon, and we would love to have you join us. We would love for you to experience this firsthand, to know what it is like to be in a community of women who are interested in the same things, that are walking similar paths, maybe different stories, but are extrapolating the same lessons and wisdom from their lived experience and sharing that and adding value and holding space and providing different resources and solutions to complex problems that we've just overcomplicated. They're actually quite simple. That is the rewilding way. And I'm so grateful for this community. I'm so grateful for the time that we've had together for me to get to this level of trust. Like there's something very poetic that's coming up for me right now, that this has all been going on for 10 years now. And I'm at this level of confidence and discernment with this content, and able to impact women in a very, very different and intentional way that I am privy of seeing how much it helps them. This is a really long episode and I hope you loved it, but it was a really important conversation. And so until next time, stay wild. Thank you so much for tuning in to Wild Medicine. I am so grateful to have you here, and I hope you're feeling inspired and empowered. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. It helps us reach more incredible women just like you. And before you go, quick reminder, the information shared on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition. Please consult with your healthcare provider for personalized advice and care. And if you're ready to take inspired action and dive deeper into your own health journey, please visit us at poppyclinic.com. Let's rewild and reset your health together.